So I will be covering the topic for configurable parameters and formulas in pricing, which is short abbreviated as CPF. So CPF has been, I mean, at least CPF has been there since long, even before commodity pricing, right? As Suraj also explained, it was there in the usual SDMM logic, SDMM documents from before for different scenarios. But today we specifically will be focusing on how CPF will be used for qualitative pricing within commodity management, and what are the steps needs to be taken to set up a formula, or how it helps in various scenarios in adding stuff like penalties or surcharges if the quality is above or beyond the specific quality as prescribed in the payment terms, or as agreed on your contract with during the trade execution. So basically this is what you would be going through today. Business context, as I said, how complex pricing rules can be set up without the need of any development effort, and how we can set up default formulas, or even formulas based on scales, which is most common at least in oil and gas industries. But we have seen at other industry specifics as well, where you have scale-based formula for your qualitative pricing. So what we will go through is I will show you an example, and then how does it looks like in a logistic document. I will also run through some sample customizing and some of additional advanced features of CPF pricing under commodity management. So let's take this. Let me skip through this. Basically, the business context here is when you execute a trade for a certain commodity, whether it is oil and gas or any other soft commodity or any other commodity, right? And for that certain commodity, there is an agreement done either from the trade execution side or from the vendor side. Most likely, it's from the trade execution side of it, so that if the quality of the product you receive, or if you are the one who's selling the commodity, then the quality of the product cannot be above or beyond certain parameters, right? So, and if it runs through those thresholds, then you end up paying some penalty on top of the price which you are going to receive or which you're going to pay. So that is the whole idea behind the qualitative pricing, and which will be managed from CPF. So here is an example, right? Like the way I explained before is if the quality of the, let's say in this case, it says talk about moisture content. So let's say if the actual moisture content of the final product you deliver or receive is more than agreed moisture content, and let's say agreed moisture content is 0.1% of that commodity quality, then the receiver or payer agrees to pay or receive $1 per ton of the commodity, right? So that is how this is the simplest of the formula which you could see, and this is how you could set up a formula in PRF Plus. Like the penalty is calculated basically actual moisture content, which is and agreed moisture content. Actual moisture content is the one which will be you will measure based off of the delivered or actual received final product, and then there will be a agreed moisture content. So that will be in your contractual agreements, and then the increment by which the penalty should be calculated. Every 0.1% increase of the moisture content of the agreed moisture content, that will be the increment of price which would be added on to the penalty, and basically the base penalty which will be used in the formula. So this is the generic idea of the way at moisture content, or for that matter, any qualitative measurement can be calculated in these scenarios. So all these all these attributes you see here, these are called formula parameters. You don't need to set them like this, the way it talks. This is just example. You can give any names you would like, which makes sense in your business context. And you're free to choose your nomenclature. Although you can do the naming convention can be anything you would like, but finally it comes down to the mapping of the way these parameters will be used in the formula. So that is the main important criteria, which we would see further down the slides. But this is what are the main primary criteria for setting up a BRF formula. And based on this, such a formula can be constructed easily. So let's see some examples now. So on the left side, again, like CPE, and I will go through the condition type settings and everything in upcoming slides. But just to give you an overview, just like how you have to create a new condition type for the CPE pricing, you would have to, create a condition type, or do some additional checks for CPF as well. And this is not new to commodity management. This has been always been there since BRF plus or qualitative pricing was always there in logistics. The condition type needs to be set up, and then you would assign a formula, or it can be either a default formula, or you can select it on the fly, and then it will be calculated. As soon as you select the formula, the system will open up fields like this, and this all depends on how you configure the parameters. Like some of the parameters can be stored to have default values within the BRF function itself. I'll talk about that in a later slide, or you can enter values here manually. So what is actual moisture content. What is agreed moisture content from your contractual agreement. Then you would enter here the actual moisture content of the final product, and the base penalty and the increment. And in this way, the BRF plus formula will look like. This is the most simplest of the formula. And as I said, you don't need to have any development background to create such a formula. If this is similar to the way we do in even some of the scenarios on financial side. So based on these values here, and the quantity, of course, this amount, the final value is $5. So looks like, so in this case here, the agreed was 7.5. What did I do? Okay. The agreed moisture content was 7.5, but the actual moisture content of the delivered product or the final product was 8. So based on the increments and the penalty, base penalty, this value was derived. Right. So at this moment, there is no conversion of unit of measure whatsoever, although you could make a more complex formula to even have those conversions accounted for. Right. But again, as I said, this is the most simplistic formula and the most widely used without having any complexities. So this is like a most complex formula you could see, right? This is something we had used or you can create, and it is slightly difficult to read through this whole formula, but you can use like this as well. So you can even set conditions like, oh, if actual content is less than agreed, then do this increment, or do or use other increment, right? You can even put a factor saying, okay, use only for this currency, get the currency of the original document, and if that currency is not equal to, let's say, USD, then use a different formula. So all this is like a most complex formula, but as I said, and this is again are done by consultants with having zero knowledge on ABAP development, right? So this is, you don't need to have any ABAP skills, and you just have to get through straight what formula you are looking for. And this is also similar to if you are expert in Excel formulas, right? This is the same way also you would write such a formula in Excel calculation as well. So BRF Plus has that kind of a flexibility on reading through the formulas the way you would also write in your Excel sheets. So going back to the document, as I was saying, this is how the larger picture of the way CPF is getting calculated. So as you see, there is a -$5 penalty, and that's what will be assigned here. And for this condition type, or the final price in your document will be adjusted of this penalty. So this is what you would pay or rather receive in required conditions, right? Okay, so now we move ahead with the customizing. This area basically talks about what are the main criteria for setting up the formula, like maintenance of the parameters, your formula itself, how do you maintain a BRF plus function, and then enable, how do you tell the HDMM condition types to read the BRF plus function, right? So this is the main screen of BRF Plus configuration, and you see n number of parameters here. As I said, you can choose between or create your own parameters, and make sure that those are used. And the data type for that is also a critical. So most of the places where you have the, because our final value is a number format or a, amount format, so it needs to have that specific data number, a data type. So, and these are standard pre-delivered data elements, data types, and you can use accordingly. And there are certain bodies also, for you to explore if there is something else is required. So all the actual moisture and agreed moisture, where there is no percentages or scales or increments are not involved, we suggest that we use these CPF, tag them with these CPF number data element or data types. And for example, here the base penalty is a rate which increases by every time there is an increment of the actual delivered quantity, actual delivered quantity in terms of moisture content. So that's why we use the CPF price rate here, and similarly, the increment is again also a number. So we will have to use that element. So when you create a formula like this, you can even test the formula, right? To if it is giving you a desired output or not. So during that test also, the BRF Plus will essentially tell you, hey, the parameter data type is incorrect. So please go ahead and check. So those type of validations are already a part of BRF Plus functionality. And it will tell you, and then basically you'll have to see what mapping you have incorrectly maintained, or if there is something data element is missing or not. And this becomes more important if you are using deal capture as your front end tool, right? So because deal capture allows only CPF elementary data type or CPF number data type for that matter to capture the values. So although they are in the newer versions, they will be adding more flexibility to this. But yeah, this becomes more important when if you are using deal capture as a front end tool. So the next step, now that you have already your formula parameters created, next step is create a formula itself, right? And then tell the formula what parameters it needs to use in order to calculate your final penalty value. So you just create a new formula ID. Again, this is not restricted to any naming convention, although you'll have to watch out for the character length. But yeah, you can define a formula like this, give a description, and then next step, you actually assign the parameters which you created. So these are the parameters which you saw in the first step. And the below one where you see result rate, result value are the standard uh, attributes. And these will always be assigned automatically in the formula. So you should not delete those because this is what drives finally the content or the final amount from the BRF plus calculation and transfers that to your logistics document. And you don't have to technically map anything like this from your end or whenever you are configuring this formula, but this needs to be there for BRF plus to understand what is the result, what is the base, and so on and so forth. So once you add this, there is an also option that if any of these parameters will be scale based, and I will talk about scale shortly, so I will not spend time here on this. But there is also second indicator where it shows that which attribute here is the result, meaning what is the output parameter that you would like to transfer the value from this formula to the logistics document. So in this example, it is it's called exposure adjustment, right? But it could be also called any other parameter, like if you want to call penalty or whatever that is. But you just have to make sure that that is the final result and this indicator is appropriately checked. So then basically, once you assign that, you will have to, again, in the next step here, assign usage task. Basically, what it does is, it again, in the previous step where you see this result base rate value, uh, it has another internal mapping which is required for BRF plus. And this is again standard. You don't have to change anything here. Although if there is a requirement for you to have multiple rates calculated, or there is some complex scenarios, we have bodies here which could be implemented, and those can be implemented and assigned here for the calculation of the rate. So I will talk about those bodies as well, but that is how it all boils down to finally the final output, which is there are two parts to it. One is the BRF plus calculates the final output, and this calculated rate or value is then transferred to the logistics document, and that is where all these parameters are maintained. Because this formula ID is assigned to your logistics document, as we saw in previous screenshots. And so these parameters are the way of telling, okay, this is the receiver from the BRF plus output, which would be passed on to in form of this. So again, if you have different scenarios or complex working formulas, then you can implement a body and use your own methods. So once this is done, you basically click the generate button, and give a name here, right? And then click on the generate and save. And once you do this, the screen will open up your internet browser, whether it is a Chrome or Internet Explorer, whatever that is, and it will take you to the BRF Plus screen. Now, this BRF Plus screen is the same as what Suraj explained in earlier session. The way it shows, it will open up the same, but it will also show you a new function on your left navigation screen to open up the BRF Plus functionality. If you go through this route, it will directly take you to the BRF Plus function. You don't need to navigate to anything. It will just take you to the screen directly. But if you just go via BRF Plus Workbench without going from here, then you will have to navigate through yourself and go drill down inside the BRF Plus formula. So in this screen here, what you are seeing, the same parameters, what you assign in your formula, basically. You see, these are the same parameters which are being assigned, which you assign to your formula. So it brings up the same screen and all those default result parameters which will be passed on to your documents.
Yep, and just to add to that, Nikhil's point, it is really very important that whenever you declare the component names like actual moisture, agreed moisture within BRF Plus, then the names, the text matches the ones that you define in the CPF. If it's different, then the system would not recognize which field data needs to be passed to which one, and then you have to do a mapping at the CPF screen. If you go one level up, Nikhil, there's a manual mapping there. If you see the last node on the left side, manual mapping, you will have to map those map the fields to CPF fields to the BRF Plus. So to avoid that, it's recommended you use the same nomenclature both at the CPF side and the BRF Plus side.
Yeah, thanks, Suraj. Mm-hmm. So based on this, now what you do is on here, you select the function mode. So if you guys probably already have worked on BRF Plus, this is something not new or specifically designed for CPF. So here you would create a formula, basically. It shows not assigned here because the actual formula is not created. You just create an ID in this step, but you did not create the actual formula itself. So you create a formula, and if you see down below here, the result rate, the outcome of the formula which you would create would be passed on to this result rate. And that result rate, whatever is the calculation, would then be passed on to your logistic document. So once you select that, it will give you a pop-up saying what type is what you're trying to create, what is that type of expression. You select formula since it is a formula-based calculation, give any name, right? And you can set this as reusable or not. It doesn't really matter. And then within this, it also asks you to select what is the output you're trying to achieve. What is that amount? What is that expression or the parameter will be the final result attribute that will be passed on. So you select from here. You can select by using add result data, or most of the times it just calculates, it just brings that default. If it does not, then you can add result data object, and then you would select that result rate from this screen here. It will bring up all these parameters in a screen. Oops. And then, sorry, my bad. And then you select that your final output is amount, because in certain cases it could be quantity also, right? You can adjust the quantity also, but that is not the goal of our formula here. But just talking about that, that's also a possibility. So once you select that, Then you say create and navigate to the object. And this is the screen where I was saying that you don't need to have a development background to make such a formula, right? So now that you have selected the amount as your result, now you simply have to select parameters from the left screen, add your functions, and additional functions if at all it is needed. So for example, in this case, uh, you start by selecting this bracket open parenthesis first, and then you say you select this actual moisture. Again, select the function of subtraction, and then agreed moisture, close parenthesis, divided by increment multiplied by base penalty multiplied by -1. Because that's the value, because we would like to deduct that amount from the final output and not add on top of it, right? That is the scenario in this case, at least. But you need not follow, I mean, whatever is the formula, because most of the times what we have seen is the vendor or the customer would give you how they are going to adjust the penalty, or how they are going to calculate the penalty, and that is part of your contractual agreement as well. Most of the times the specific commodities have standardized formulas, so which is published either on exchanges, or or either on their portals, and you just have to ask for it and then design this formula in your system as well. You can even delete whatever you have done, right? You can move the cursor and whatnot. So this is quite flexible here. Um, and let's say if you want to have on top of this some other functions added, right? Like I was talking how easy it is. It has all the Excel functionalities like concatenate, and if you can refer to different tables and make all sorts of complexities, like if conditions, else if conditions, greater than, equal to, and all those parameters, all those variations can be achieved using the BRF plus formula. As I was saying, you can also simulate. So once you are finished, you activate the formula, save and activate, and you would then be allowed to do a simulation of the value. So now next screen basically does that. I have activated my formula, and then I would start my simulation. So at this point, I don't even need an actual document to check whether the prices are correct or not. I can just simulate right from the BRF Plus screen. Similar to the screen here, what you see here, in the simulation screen in BRF Plus also will bring the same kind of screen output here, and then you just enter the data and execute, and then it will show you the output, whether the output is, and then you can check whether your formula is doing fine or not. And I also talked about errors you would receive, like for example, if you missed a close parenthesis here, the system will right away give you while activating also the errors. But sometimes those errors are not logical to be those some of the errors uh, are not caught during the activation of the formula itself, because the formula thinks, okay, this formula is correct. But once you go to simulation, you would see that, oh, something is wrong, and maybe data element was wrong or something like that. So those type of errors can be caught during the simulation as well. So once you activate and save it, now your formula is ready, and you can start creating your documents and see if everything is looking good. Regarding the condition type functionality itself, configuration itself, everything is almost similar. The condition class is here discount or surcharge. Calculation type is quantity, because the moisture content is calculated on the quantity, not on the price itself. And the only difference here is you have to make sure this indicator here enabled for CPF is checked. Only then the system will know that, hey, I need to go and refer to the CPF formula. Okay. So again, as I was saying, you can select the formula here, or you can even default it on your condition types. And the formula will then be just calculated, applied whenever that condition type is assigned in your SDMM document, whatever that is. And whatever values you enter here, it will also be, then it will be just used, and the final amount will be captured. So just going through what we have seen, what are the benefits? Basically, as I was talking, it's a very flexible tool to calculate your qualitative analysis, and you can retrieve parameters and the values on the results dynamically every time, and it gives you an additional benefit or flexibility in defining your own formula without having to have any ABAP development involved. And you can also have scales, which I will now bring up, how scales are integrated in BRF Plus. So this is again, this talks about how you can default your BRF Plus formulas, right? So as I was saying, you can do this by creating a condition record. So let's say in this case, for the sales organization and distribution channel, and for this material, I can just default this formula ID. And as you see here, the parameters are also defaulted, and leaving actual moisture content, because actual moisture content will change every time based on the delivered product. So that is how you can default all these values. And once you save this and use this when the condition type is called in your document, logistics document, all these values will be filled up, but you would need to change the actual moisture, add the actual moisture content. So that's how the defaulting will work. Moving forward, this is the scales now. It adds a little slightly different scenario and slightly little bit extra complexity to the formula. So what this says is if the moisture content is between 5 to 7, the base penalty is $0.5 per tons. If it is 7 to 8, it is 0.75, and so on and so forth. So the base penalty now in the formula is not the same, which we saw in our earlier examples. It was always 1, but now it changes according to the moisture content falling between a scale. So CPF supports these kinds of scenarios as well. And these are the most common use. Either it's a simple formula or scale-based formulas. So that is the most commonly used what we have seen so far. So as I was saying, in the formula setting, the only difference is for the attribute which needs to be which needs to have a scale-based calculation, you have to make sure that the scale indicator is checked here. So in this case, since the base penalty is changing, right? So that's why you add scale for base penalty itself. So if it was just 1 here, then you need not have any scale. And then again, and this happens now either directly in your logistics document. So as soon as you call up this function, now since in the configuration, this base penalty is allowed for scales, this button will automatically become activated. Otherwise, in all other cases, it was not, right? So now in the document itself, you can add the scale if you want, or again, you can do this in your condition record master data. So once you add the scale, it will, even you can have different variations in the scale again. So simple is from and to scale, like from level 5 to 7. This is what it will use, 7 to 9, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Or you could also have a cumulative scales, right? So that functionality is also available. And based on that, then the values will be calculated. So simple from and to scale. So what happens here? So now I have selected, this is the scale information. So the agreed was 7.5, but the actual moisture content was 9.1. So this immediately falls between the scale 7 to 9 or 8 to 9, whatever that is. So for anything above 9, what is applied, the base penalty is to be applied 1.1. So this automatically gets captured from the scale table directly, right? And again, these some parameters are for different scenarios. Like you can provide a threshold as cap and flows as well, but in this case, it's not required. But as I said, BRF Plus is quite flexible in the kind of formula you desire to make. So based on that, the simple formula which we saw before will kick in, and it will calculate a value of negative 17.6. Okay. So as I was also saying, apart from QCI, this also supports to calculate the actual moisture content from a batch. Again, this is a method. Again, you can use it for defaulting so that the user do not have to enter anything manually. So the actual moisture content of the final product can be derived using the batch management as well. So this also and these settings will be then added on. I mean, the normal batch management settings, which you probably do on the material master, that needs to be completed like this. And based on those values you maintain and the formula itself, the result can then be calculated directly on the document. So again, this is how, more additional customizing, whether you could, what kind of, data reference types and data categories you can use. There are, as I was saying, there are certain bodies also you can implement based on what is the usage of that particular parameter. Because CPF, I mean, it's not only restricted to calculate your price adjustment or quantity adjustment. If there is something else, in those cases, you would have to enter, make some body implementations and, allow CPF to calculate those, whatever attributes you're using, adjustments on top of that. So that's pretty much, you could do, and then you can derive that formula using a master record or, even from the CPF or BRF Plus UI. So in all these, settings, you just have to make sure, and even what Suraj was also talking about, all the parameters which you create with appropriate data types, it has to be mapped properly in the formula. That is the main thing it boils down to. You can create any formula, any data elements whatsoever, but the mapping of the formula and the manual mapping in such cases where you have implementation for different data elements, those needs to be appropriately mapped in under the CPF customizing. Otherwise, you'll face issues like probably values are not getting calculated. In some worst conditions, you could even see dumps. So I mean, it's and you just then need to do an analysis of what is failing and what is causing those issues. What are the issues that causes that dumps or errors? So this is just, it shows how, based on the example before of the batch content maintained on the material master, how the system was able to derive actual moisture content directly from the batch information stored on the material master. So in this screen here, you saw here the actual moisture content derived from the batch was 8%. So that's what, oops, that's what has been captured in this document directly. And accordingly, then the value is also retrieved. This just shows the customizing view where you can find the settings. Under sales and distribution, here you would see configurable parameters and formulas in pricing. And these are the only 5 nodes which you would need to do. Create a BRF plus function. So similar to CPE, what you Suraj was talking about in the morning, that you create a function first, activate it. So the same type of settings you would need to do for BRF plus application for CPF, and then add those usages if you have any custom structure or maintain parameters, and then finally define the formula. And within this, you below you could also find the bodies which you would need to implement for CPF. Similar nodes are available on the material management as well here. So this goes into more talking about how the BRF plus function is set up, right? So if you want, you can set this up as customizing, which means every time you make change to the formula, it needs to be transported no matter what. So you have to be very careful while setting this up, because there is an option here which could make all these functions as a master data. So that means every system you have to create your BRF plus changes, whatever changes you would like to do. So SAP suggests that you always use customizing. So the transport request takes care of all the changes which you would probably do during the setup of BRF plus CPF formula. And then basically whatever function you create, you have to activate it. That's the method of this. And this is similar to exactly what we saw on CPF side as well. So as I was saying, you can create your custom structures, right? Custom values, components, like these are the characteristic name and these are custom elements. And once you do that, you will have to add a purpose or a meaning and then assign it properly in the parameters section or formula section, and then make sure whatever body implementations you do, they are able to read these values and return you a desired output. So that is where these custom structure is mainly involved. And mostly in most of our projects and experiences, we have seen that, I mean, very few cases where we had to use these custom structures. Otherwise, the standard way of doing a formula or that is most likely sufficient enough.
Yeah, and to add on that, just an example what a custom structure can be like. So here you can see you have a structure already available where you want to read the quality specification of and get the value. So similarly, you may also want to read any condition type on that line item, right, from the document. If you want to refer to that, you can have a custom structure where you are going to have the parameters for condition type and the item number. So that's just an example that you may have the requirement of a custom structure, which is not too many. I mean, you won't get too many such requirements, but this is just an example.
So again, this is the same thing which we saw earlier. Whatever custom structures you create, you will add it here in the parameter catalog. And then the data source is just noting that, for these custom structures, appropriate implementations have been done so that the system is able to make a meaning out of it. And, they are used appropriately in the formula and the result is correctly returned. Here, then, you could also do a manual mapping. So, for example, if you don't want to use any any rate to be passed on to these SAP defined usage tasks, you can also use your own calculations, as I said, and then assign the root of body implementation, which you would do, and assign it here. Most likely or not, these will be automatically added once you create the formula. So once you click generate here and click assign, this BRF plus function gets added automatically. If it does not, then you just go to manual mapping. So if you have any other custom structures added, that's when you would come here in manual mapping and add your BRF plus function to the appropriate calculator rate, or what is the final output parameter you would like to have. So this is the same information on how do you start using your commodity CPF. So this is the business function information which needs to be activated if you want to use CPF.
Hey, sorry, Nikhil, I was speaking, but can you go one slide back? Yes. So what Nikhil was showing here in this last screenshot, there is an option where you can do the generate button using the red and white, and you can generate, and what Nikhil showed earlier, that you can create the function on the fly and it gets assigned. If you want to delink that function, somehow you think that this function is no more required, I need a new function, and you have a new function which can be assigned, then you can delink this BRF plus function by selecting that line on the calculate rate and clicking this button, delink. And
Right.
if you have another function available, then you select the line and click on that link button, the one on left of it. You yes, this one. You click on this and you get a pop-up of the function name, if whatever you want to assign, and you can just give it there and it gets linked again. Or if by mistake you delink the same function and you want to assign it back, then you can do using the same method. You click on that link button and give the function name and it gets linked again. So just to add on Nikhil's point, you can delink as well.
Right.
But again, if you delink and don't supply anything, then it won't do anything because there is no BRF plus connection anymore.
Right. So moving on, these are some advanced features, like I was saying about cumulative scales, graduated scales, and stuff like that. So these are some little bit complex, adds a little bit more complexity to the normal scales, like from and to scales. And more often we have seen such scenarios in oil and gas space where they have cumulative scales published by big players, vendors like Chevron, Shell. So that is where we use these cumulative graduated scales in the application. So everything remains the same. There is no change as such. All these actual moisture, greed, everything remains the same. In just the scale side, you would know what scales are going to what parameter needs to have a scale functionality, and these settings we have already seen where previously while defining a rate, and now this is like an example of a cumulative graduated scale example. So between 4,000 to 8,000, if the market price, the final price is between 4,000 to 8,000, the base price is 0.06, and so on. It changes every time, the market price increases. So based on that, then the base price, if you notice here in this case, there is no increment on the base penalty itself, but there is an increment on the price of the actual market price, the closing price published by the market. So, and the increment is basically in percentage of the increment in the market price. So, and then based on that, it shows whether if the market price increases or is between this range, there is a discount. But if the market price is between this, then it's not a discount, but it is added on top of your price, right? So your formula needs to be able to handle all these cases. And if there is, in between this range, basically there is no penalty. It's just the. So as I was explaining, this slide just explains how these are calculated. The base price is applied between this range as addition to the price, or there is a discount in the price if it is between this range, and there is no penalty if the price in between these two 9,000 to 10,000 US dollar per tons. The formula is still the same. This is something not you would. This is not basically captured in your BRF Plus formula. The BRF Plus will still use the same, but this SAP does by default internally when it comes to calculate the price. So if let's say the market price was 4,500, so what it does is the base price is calculated based on, since it 4,500 is between this range, it takes the lower end or the greater part of the scale, and this is what it uses: 8,000 minus 4,500, and this is the base price level which it needs to accumulate for. And then it also, since it's a cumulative scale, and this is the part where the scale actually becomes zero. That's why you would add on top of it the values based off this range as well. So for example, if there was two more layers in between, let's say this was 4,000 to 6,000, and then what there was 6,000 to 8,000, and then there was 8,000 to 9,000. Oops, sorry. Then here, apart from, once you start doing that, you would have added three more factors also based on each scale. So that's the idea of using cumulative scales, right? It's the math behind it. So that's how you would calculate and arrive to a final price. And similarly, 8,600 is basically calculated, since 8,600 is between this, and there is no more layer in between the zero where the scale becomes zero. That's why you just see just one portion or just one time calculation here, and that's why the value is $16. And similarly, if the value is 12,100, like in this case here, and then there is one more layer in between, you would calculate in this fashion. And then this is negative 61, which is a discount on top of on the final price calculated in the document. So this is the idea behind the cumulative graduated scale, and the system will this calculation all based on how you maintain the scales. It will be done by the system itself. So this is how I mean the same example. What you see is added here, right? Scale level, and then initially in the first example of scales we saw here, the evaluation routine was from to scale, but in this case you select cumulative scale, and you would say start ascending descending factor. So in this case, start descending 9, because this is where the level is 0 or value is 0 at which there is no penalty, and start ascending from 10. So here you would do that, and system automatically knows that below 9 it starts descending toward different value scale level. Here the scale increment is always 1. This could also be changed if you want to. Once you change this factor here, what you divide here, that would appropriately use that value. Oh, sorry, from the per ton value. This scale increment will be used in your final BRF plus formula. So the same example, what you saw here, this is how the cumulative graduated scale would be added in your document. Again, this can be added directly on your document, or you can default it in your condition record. Similarly, there is just graduated scale where it works very similar, but the denominator here is not is the scale base value itself. So in here, what we saw, the base value was the increment, right? But here, instead of increment, it will use the base value of this. So the market, if the market price was 4,500, that's what it will use here, and it will calculate at different values. And all this, I mean, this will be part of the contractual agreement you receive, or it will be published on the vendor website. So you don't need to worry about how it is done or what needs to be applicable in your formula, but you just need to refer to the document provided on the contract, or ask the customer basically what's the idea behind the scale. Similarly, this is how you will select a different evaluation routine here, which says graduated scale, and appropriately based on the example, this will be calculated. So what we have seen right now here, the three scale types, like from to scale, you can even mention here like from scale to scale. So you can give values like that, and the system is automatically able to capture the base penalties and what's the output of the final value. So this is another way of defining your scales. It's pretty much straightforward once you start playing around with it in your condition record or directly from the logistics document. So these are the bodies which you have right now, as we were explaining before. These are the standard delivered task types. But if you have different scenarios which are slightly complex and you need to add more calculation rates or basis, then these are the bodies and enhancement spots you can use and apply your own logic in the evaluation of the formula. Can also be used for scale evaluation. For example, if this is something which is not acceptable to you, then you can even have a Z table created of your own, and using these bodies, you can read those Z table instead of the condition record. So that is also possible by using these body definitions. Again, once you do that, this is pretty much straightforward, that you would need to assign the body implementation to usage task. Like in this case, calculate rate, which is the final output. You can define your body implementation and assign it here. It's available in the CPF customizing, where you say define customer specific routine. So that is where you assign, and all these parameters, the way you define earlier for a normal formula, would needs to be then you need to make logical connection between the implementation and the parameters you're going to use. This just talks about more how you can implement your bodies. Talks about some example implementations, values, new custom source parameters, Z parameters basically, and what is the assignment of your own body implementation in the CPF routines. So again, this is just an overview of what we checked currently. This is more of a CPF UI configuration, which is also part of the pricing configuration which Suraj was talking yesterday. And you can add, remove make visible or mandatory fields using that configuration, and also have some more bodies there if you really want to change something of your own. So this is what we went through today. How flexible BRF plus tool is for CPF, how the formulas and parameters are set up, and how they are retrieved using various data sources, or how you can add your own custom routines and custom scenarios using the CPF framework.